Hey folks, I'm just gonna share a little video on using the Forksta, which is just a really small Broadfork. I'm used to using big, like Meadow Creature Broadforks, which are awesome, full-size Broadforks. This one is one of a few out there made by the Crafty Gatherer. This one is in New Zealand, which is just a smaller Broadfork. I mean, it still is a Broadfork, a good, deep, loosening soil decompaction fork. Much better for most garden work than a regular flat fork or manure fork, people sometimes call them, for actually using it in a garden. Those forks have their place for sure, kind of, for moving some materials. The flat 4 or 5 tine forks, but those are not nearly as good for bed preparation. So yeah, really appreciate getting to use this one by the folks in New Zealand. Again, the Crafty Gatherer. I'll show its use briefly here. I mean, I'll jump on it sometimes, but this bed has been double dug before, so it definitely doesn't need this, but it's one of the only beds I have open right now, so just wanted to demo on it. This will loosen up very compacted soil. This was garlic, so it still has a lot of mulch on it. I harvested garlic like 2-3 weeks ago, and then threw a black EPDM tarp over it. I don't have one of those to show you, but they're like pond liner scraps that we save when we built ponds, and they're awesome because they'll just shred all the weeds very quickly. So I usually work backwards. I didn't actually do the beginning right here, but this soil is in great shape. It's not very high in organic matter, actually. It needs some more kind of octane, but the composition and the tilt and the depth is really awesome. There's actually a bunch of biochar in here too. We've made biochar on site a whole bunch, and then we'll work it into the compost and then put it in the beds. So I don't like stepping in the bed at all. Ideally, you'd have a board to stand on when you're doing this, but I am loosening up the areas that I was on. But I don't know. Honestly, I think standing in a bed, I'm just demoing that. That's how people will work with these large beds. But I'd rather do this, and even if I loosen it not quite as well, I'm never stepping in the bed, which is just moving in the wrong direction. So why move in the wrong direction a little to move in the right direction more? I'd rather not move in the wrong direction at all, especially when the bed is in as good shape as this is. Maybe for a worse bed, I wouldn't feel that way. But, you know, for really weedy beds, this is also another great thing that I learned from Jody Roebuck. When dealing with these very wide beds, which to me the jury's out here as to whether they make the most sense for us, you can harvest by standing on a fork. You can access the whole bed with that as a step, or you can cross the bed very easily too, or, you know, fairly easily for such a huge bed. Again, I'm not convinced that I want these 4.5, 5.5 foot wide beds. This isn't even as wide as some of the ones here. I mean, Jody and the Grow Biodynamic folks, or excuse me, Biointensive, really into having beds that are as wide as your wingspan, how tall you are. Because in theory, you can reach to the middle point of a bed that size if you're pretty agile and in good shape. that makes a lot of sense for, I think, where a lot of the biointensive work is being applied globally, where space is an issue. Where I live, bed space isn't really an issue. I have plenty of bed space. Time available and management, energy and time to garden these beds is the limiting factor, not space. So I'd rather a bed that's just easier to manage. It's all about manageability for us, not, square footage available. So there's a pretty good sized rock under here. I will use these to fish out rocks. Now you can see there's another 4. This isn't even 5.5 feet, or a little more, which is how tall I am. This is probably 4.5, and it's still pretty difficult to be in here because the bed has reached across the path into the next bed. I mean, it's fine. I don't come in here that often, but I'd like a setup that's a little more usable. Honestly, I think these beds are a bit wide for my context. It's awesome when they're full of crop, for sure. It's a ton of food when it's full of crop, when you have 5.5 feet of bed. But I think it's more manageable to have it narrower. Let's work this way now. Again, this bed doesn't really need it. It's going in just no problem. Edge of the path, maybe it's going to benefit a bit. But honestly, decompaction's kind of overrated in some soils too, I think. I've seen beautiful heads of salad and other plants, not necessarily roots, but kale and chard, growing just as well in the path as in the bed, which got none of the labor and hours of time loosening it, or even the compost addition as the bed, and a chard plant's doing basically almost as well in the path. So that's kind of keeps things in perspective. I mean, I think it does matter in certain soils a lot for any crop, but for some crops in some soils, it's not. I mean, it's good. It's always good to have like a super loose bed of soil where the plants are accessing a real depth. But I think some of the emphasis on that and how much plants need that is a bit overdone. Doesn't seem, if you just look at certain plants and how they do, they can do okay in a compacted path with less fertility. Is there a question? There could be a question for sure over how long is that sustainable for? Well, probably be way better in a deep loosened bed for sure. We're accessing more nutrients and more of the soil horizon. But it's easy to get a little crazy about it. I think these 5.5 foot double dug beds, which is like full biointensive prescription, is not so practical for everyone. For sure, if space is very limited, you need to get the most out of your per square foot. That's an amazing model, for sure. Definitely not too harsh on John Jevons biointensive, all the biointensive stuff. It's awesome. They figured out a lot. It's definitely a key place for all vegetable growers to look to for important info and inspiration. But it's important to point out some contextual differences, because we've taken that approach here at full biointensive beds, and we're now narrowing the beds, and I'm trying to enlarge the paths a bit and dome it up a little more, get some more height, have a little more manageability. We don't use mechanization in this whole garden at all. We did originally, we tilled it one year, but that's it.